everyone, I'm Shaylin with Reedsy, and today we're going to be talking about how to write a synopsis. Also, yes, the background did change. I moved, and so we lost the bookshelves. We're all mourning it. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about how to write a synopsis. Synopsis is something you might be needing for a grant, application, or most likely, and what we're going to be talking about in this video, for a query letter. It's a summary of the general narrative arc of your entire book that usually also includes the ending, although sometimes an agent will specify that they don't want the ending to be spoiled, but usually this is going to encompass the entire story. Your synopsis should do two things. First, it should convey your book's content, but it should also aim to do so in an interesting way. You want to use your synopsis as a way to showcase both your book's content and your writing abilities. The length of a synopsis does vary depending on its use and what's requested. A standard synopsis is going to be around 1 to 2 single-space pages, but make sure you adjust based on what your agent or whoever you're sending this synopsis to specifically requests. Now, a synopsis you would send to an agent is different from the type of synopsis you would see on a book's dust jacket. Here, there's usually a little summary, but it leaves the ending open. It doesn't spoil very much because it's meant to capture the reader's attention, not let them know what happens throughout the entire book, because that would defeat the point of reading the entire book. A synopsis that you would give to an agent covers the entire plot, and it's not going to be written in that suspenseful, punchy way that you would see on a book's jacket. In your synopsis, you want to focus on your protagonist and the primary arc of the story. You might have a lot of side characters or subplots, but you probably won't have the space to go very in-depth into discussing them in your synopsis. When introducing your protagonist, what's most key is to make sure to state their goals and motivation, and make it clear how they change over the course of the story. No matter what the point of view or narrative style of your book is, a synopsis should always be written in third-person present tense. Use good, powerful verbs and make sure to avoid things like passive language. When in doubt with the synopsis, less is more. Avoid going into detail on a side character or subplot that isn't relevant to the main narrative arc. You also won't have time to go really in depth on specific plot points. You're kind of just giving a general sketch of the plot line. The point of your synopsis isn't to recreate the effect of reading the book. That's probably not going to be possible in such a short amount of time. The point of the synopsis is rather to give the agent enough information that they're going to want to read the entire manuscript. So anything that's not immediately relevant to the primary arc you're describing drags down the momentum of the synopsis and wastes valuable words that you could be using somewhere else. Every word really counts here, so it's much more efficient to use those words describing your primary arc rather than getting distracted by side details. Although it is tempting, because the side details are often cool. When writing your synopsis, it can really help to make an outline to work from first. You'll want to focus on the inciting incident, the rising action of the plot, the climax, and then the resolution. To stay focused, remember to always come back to your character's motivation. You probably don't have the time to explain your protagonist really in depth, but goal and motivation are the most important traits you want to describe. Your character's personality and background and other traits might be interesting, but it's the goal and motivation that have the most direct influence on the plot. You'll also want to avoid trying to explain the effect of certain scenes, for example saying, this is a very important scene in the book, or this is a very suspenseful scene in the book. Even though it's a synopsis, so you will be relying on telling rather than showing, this is a bit of telling too far. Even if you're describing the events in a very removed, quick way, the reader should still be able to tell that this is an important moment without being told. A synopsis is really meant to intrigue, so it should also highlight what's new, original, fresh, and interesting about your book. Although you can't go too in-depth on your character, choose a few strong, interesting details to define them and show why their journey is interesting. While explaining plot events, you can also describe your character's emotions to show their emotional journey, which will help the reader get more invested even in just a synopsis. Here are a few things you could highlight to show your book's originality. First of all would be voice. Although you can't really describe what the voice of the book is going to be in the synopsis, you can use your writing style in the synopsis to show your voice as a writer. Plot twists are also a great thing to highlight if you have a really good one, especially near the end. You can also highlight an interesting point of view. Another example of a really interesting one that would be worthy to highlight would be Nutshell by Ian McEwan, which is a retelling of Hamlet told from the point of view of a fetus. This is a very interesting narrative style choice, so it's again something you'd want to mention at the beginning. This book is told from the point of view of Hamlet, who is a fetus. That in itself is pretty eye-catching. That's really all I would need to hear to want to read more. Even if you don't have any really dramatic narrative style choices, it's still good to highlight the qualities of your protagonist that make them an interesting narrator. Again, you can't go too in-depth onto their characterization, but for example, if they're an unreliable narrator, this is something that adds another layer of intrigue to your story. When you're actually writing your synopsis, you'll want to start with a paragraph that introduces the main character, and then also the problem or conflict that they're going to be faced with throughout the story. So this will usually come in the form of describing the inciting incident. So for example, let's say that I was writing a book about a character named Sally, because every character in an example about writing is always named Sally. So in the first paragraph, I would introduce her character and the problem she's faced with. Let's say she's a garden supply store employee, and as she's closing up shop for the night, all of the plants come to life and escape into the city. So in the first paragraph, we've been introduced to who our protagonist is, what their problem is, and also the setting of the story. We're also going to get a feel for what kind of story this is. It's going to be kind of a wacky adventure type story that's probably going to be taking place within just one night as Sally runs around town trying to bring all these rogue plants back to the store. In the second paragraph, we would focus on the major plot beats and introduce any characters who are super relevant to that plot development. So characters who aren't immediately relevant might not be mentioned. Maybe Sally has a roommate who she talks to on the phone a couple times, but her roommate isn't immediately relevant to this summary, so we don't need to mention her. However, maybe during the plotline she meets an enigmatic traveler with a weed whacker who's also wandering around town and teams up with him. That would be very relevant to the plot development, since meeting this character is going to have a really direct impact on the plot, since this character is now going to help her solve her problem. You also want to highlight other key plot events or plot twists. So for example, if the plants all broke into the local zoo, and so now Sally has to sneak into the zoo and retrieve a plant from like the lion cage, that would be a pretty important plot point to mention. Or maybe if there's a plot twist, maybe she learns the plants have been animated due to some strange planetary alignment. That's kind of a plot twist information reveal, so that would also be something to mention. In the final paragraph, you want to explain how the major conflicts are resolved. So maybe at the very end of the story, near sunrise, Sally manages to obtain a U-Haul and lures all her plants inside and traps them in the U-Haul and drives them back to the store. When you're done writing your synopsis, it's time to edit and refine it. It's really key to edit for clarity and efficiency, to make sure there are no redundant details that aren't adding anything, make sure you're not repeating yourself. You also want to make sure your sentences are as tight as possible so that there's no wordiness, because that's also just eating up words that you could be using to describe another plot point. A synopsis is the opposite of writing a book because you're going to be relying on telling rather than showing. Showing in a synopsis can cause clarity issues, so it's okay to just be upfront. When you're done, get feedback from readers to make sure there's nothing that's confusing. Get some people who don't know anything about your book to read your synopsis, and then ask them questions about it to make sure they haven't misunderstood anything. You wouldn't want an agent to get the wrong idea about your book just because you had some confusing phrasing in there. So that's how to write a synopsis. If you want to revisit the information in this video, you can check out the blog post linked in the description, and remember to subscribe for new videos every Tuesday and Friday. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time.